It started with a hoodie. Too small. Worn thin. Always zipped to her chin even in the heat. At first, Sam thought the girl next door was just shy. A little odd. Quiet. But when she knocked on his door asking for warmth, and refused to say who she was afraid of, he started paying attention. And what he uncovered didn't just expose a lie, it unearthed a secret that had already crossed state lines. This is the story of a missing girl, a man pretending to be a hero, and the neighbor who finally stopped staying silent. If you believe the quiet ones deserve to be seen, hit like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's begin. Sam Torres noticed the child long before she ever approached his door. She seemed younger than 10, but there was something oddly burdened in the way she carried herself. Every single day at precisely 7 in the morning, Sam watched her walk down the sidewalk in front of his ground-floor apartment window. He had been out of the military for a few years and was used to an early start. The faint squeak of the old gate near his building served as a kind of alarm clock, just in case his own internal one failed. That first glimpse told him all he needed to know about her mood. Head down, shoulders hunched forward, she walked as if the world weighed too heavily on her small frame. She wore the same navy blue hoodie each time, torn at the cuffs, too small to zip up fully, and sporting a worn wolf patch on the left sleeve. Sam couldn't quite say why it bothered him so much. It wasn't as though he was the curious type. Usually he minded his own business, fixing cars for locals in his rundown garage, keeping his interactions minimal. He guessed the girl was 9, maybe younger, but it was impossible to be certain. She moved with a certain caution he recognized. It reminded him of the kids he'd seen in some of the war-torn places he'd served, children who knew too much of life's harsh realities. Day after day she shuffled past, head lowered, hood drawn tight even under the relentless summer sun. Sometimes, when the breeze lifted the corner of her hood, he caught a glimpse of bruises or scrapes. He tried to tell himself it could have been from playing or from some minor mishap. Yet each time, something in his gut told him otherwise. He wanted to ignore that intuition. He knew from experience that intervening in matters you only half understood could lead to all sorts of complications. He wasn't exactly on great terms with the world. He had never fully adjusted to civilian life. Still, the image of her huddled in that frayed hoodie lingered. It was a dreary Thursday, the kind of day where clouds blanketed the sky, threatening rain. Sam was in his kitchen, trying to decide if he should bother making dinner or just heat a frozen meal again. Through the window, he saw the girl hustling down the street. Her steps were more urgent than usual. She kept glancing behind her, as if half expecting someone to come running after her. He stood there, motionless, until she passed by. She never looked up, but her pace unsettled him. The knock at his door came just after dusk. He had nearly convinced himself that her anxious demeanor would fade from his mind. He didn't want to be the neighbor who pried, but something wouldn't let him rest. So, when he heard the timid rapping on the wood, he almost knew who it would be before he opened up. Sure enough, there stood the girl, drenched by the rain that had started pouring a few minutes ago. The hoodie was plastered to her thin arms. Water dripped from the edges of her sleeves, forming a puddle around her worn sneakers. "Do you have something warm I can borrow?" she asked in the tiniest voice. "Our heater's not working again." The raw shakiness in her tone made Sam's heart clench. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but he held back. He just nodded, gesturing for her to wait. She stayed on the doorstep, rigid with cold but not stepping inside. Sam rummaged around for a flannel blanket he kept for emergencies. When he handed it to her, she wrapped it tight around her shoulders. "You're soaked," he said, keeping his voice as gentle as he could. "Do you need me to call someone?" She shook her head fiercely, clutching the blanket. "No, he doesn't like it when I talk to people." She looked down at her feet. She didn't name who he was, but it was obvious from her trembling lips that something was very wrong. Sam stood there for a moment, unsure how to proceed. In his past life in uniform, the chain of command was clear. Problems had a defined structure and solutions. But out here, in this unremarkable neighborhood, it was complicated. He offered to let her come inside for a minute, at least to dry off, but she shook her head again. "I have to go," she said, and hurried off into the rain, leaving Sam holding the door in a state of half-shock. After that night, he found himself watching her more carefully. He didn't hover or follow. He remembered well how intrusive that felt. But he made mental notes. He noticed the time she came home, or at least when he spotted her from his window. The next week, it was close to midnight when she walked by, shoulders hunched, looking even more lost than before. Where was she coming from at that hour? And why did she hold her arms so stiffly against her ribs? One afternoon, while taking out the trash, he caught a glimpse of her rummaging through his garbage, fishing out old food wrappers. He felt an uncomfortable pang of guilt. Was she hungry? Were they not feeding her properly? Her wide eyes locked with his for an instant before she darted away, dropping the scraps. A day or two later, he glimpsed the bruise on her arm when her sleeve slid up. It was not the kind of bruise a child would get from climbing a tree or bumping into a table. It was in the shape of fingerprints, as though someone had grabbed her too hard. Sam's mind flashed to the men he had known who always seemed to have a short fuse, men who lashed out when they were drunk or frustrated. In his time overseas, he had occasionally come across local families where anger turned into violence behind closed doors. Here in his own backyard, that pattern seemed too familiar. He made a decision then, one that felt long overdue. He gathered his nerve and called child services. He described what he had witnessed: the late hours, the bruises, the possible neglect. They said they would send someone to check the situation. Sam felt a strange knot in his stomach after hanging up, a mixture of relief and dread. When the caseworker came, Sam watched from his window as she knocked on the door of the duplex 2 doors down. He noticed how meticulously clean the lawn was: manicured grass, neat shrubs, not a stray leaf in sight. The man who answered the door stood tall, hair neatly trimmed, wearing a polite, patient expression. Sam saw him gesturing inside, inviting the caseworker to look around. 10 minutes passed, then 15. When they emerged, the caseworker was smiling, tucking her clipboard under her arm. The foster father walked her out, shaking her hand warmly. Nia, Sam realized he had only learned her name from overhearing it once, was nowhere in sight. He waited anxiously for the findings. When they finally contacted him to follow up, they explained that the home appeared perfectly suitable. The child was just shy, they said. The father claimed she was withdrawn ever since she lost her mother. The bruises, he said, were from her own clumsiness. The hoodie? A keepsake from her mother, which explained why she wore it day and night. Sam wanted to scream. He wanted to say, "That's not right," but the official line was that they found no immediate evidence of abuse or neglect. The report was closed. That Friday, Sam met up with his sister, Detective Aria Reed, for their weekly diner lunch. Though not siblings by blood, they had grown up together in foster care, bouncing from home to home. Their bond was forged in an endless shuffle of social workers, group homes, and shared nightmares. Aria, the younger of the two, had chosen to join law enforcement, determined to protect kids like them from slipping through the cracks. She was quiet as they slid into their usual booth. Manila folders and notes were scattered across the table, her cell phone buzzing sporadically with calls or texts. The lines on her brow hinted at exhaustion. "Rough day?" Sam asked, pouring her some coffee from the little metal pitcher that always sat in the booth. Aria nodded, flipping through a file. "Kid missing," she muttered. "Around 9 or 10, no official ID, no known relatives. Last seen passing through this county last week. One witness mentioned she wore a navy hoodie with a wolf patch. Might be the same missing child reported in a neighboring state. I've got scribbled statements from a gas station clerk, some half-legible accounts from a bus driver. Nothing solid." Sam froze at the mention of the hoodie. He set his coffee mug down, no longer interested in sipping. The image of Nia's battered hoodie flooded his mind. Aria noticed his reaction immediately. "What is it?" she asked, looking up from the folder. "There's a girl who lives 2 doors down from me," he said carefully. "Wears a navy hoodie every day. Torn wolf patch on the sleeve, about 9 years old. I had a feeling something was off." Aria's brows knitted together. She flipped to a page in her file, scanning a list of details. Small build, possibly malnourished. Black hair long. A mole on her left hand, near the base of the thumb. Sam nodded. "She has that mole. I noticed it when she asked for a blanket." Aria exhaled, pressing her lips together. "And you called child services?" He gave a short nod. They saw a spotless house and a father with a perfect smile. No follow-up. Aria's expression darkened. She shut the folder, taking a moment to collect her thoughts. They both had grown up in a system that often missed the signs, especially when an abuser knew how to clean up and play polite for the authorities. That fact had haunted their childhood. Before they parted, she told him to keep his phone on, to call her if anything seemed urgent. Sam felt a bit of hope flicker, knowing Aria wouldn't let this go without a deeper look. Later that evening, as Sam was finishing some repair work in his garage, he noticed something peculiar in his trash once again. A crumpled receipt from a local gas station. The timestamp was that very morning. He certainly hadn't been to that gas station recently, so who had tossed that receipt? The name of the business was located off Route 12, a stone's throw from a rundown motel known as the Hunter's Lodge. No cameras, no ID checks. His mind raced. He decided to show it to Arya. She came by, took one look at it, and frowned. That's near where a couple leads have placed the missing child. Someone might be moving her around. The father might be covering his tracks. They agreed to check the hunter's lodge. Arya was off duty, but she had enough clout to make a few calls to a buddy in uniform to have someone on standby if needed. She insisted on going with Sam, refusing to let him walk into a potentially dangerous situation alone. When they arrived at the motel, the place looked as seedy as Sam remembered. Dim neon sign flickering, a deserted parking lot full of potholes, a worn-out building with paint peeling around the windows. Arya stayed in the car at first, calling for backup. Sam took a deep breath and walked up to room 14, noticing the door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. The stale smell of mold and cigarette smoke hit him. A single light flickered on the ceiling. There she was, Nia. Her back was to him, wrists bound with zip ties in front of her, a silent quiver in her shoulders. Her worn hoodie was folded neatly beside her on the frayed bedspread. She seemed to sense him even before he spoke. "Sam," she whispered, turning. Her eyes held a depth of fear he couldn't have imagined. "He told me not to move. Said he'd hurt me worse if I tried to run." Rage and a sickening dread coiled in Sam's gut. He took a step closer, carefully. "It's okay," he whispered. "I'm getting you out of here." Just then the bathroom door squeaked open. Out stepped the foster father, wearing combat boots, a camo jacket, and a pair of what looked like pristine dog tags around his neck. His stance was wrong, though. Sam recognized it immediately. The man had claimed a military background, but from that quick glance, Sam doubted it. He was just wearing the uniform for show. He had probably guessed that some official-looking credentials or the aura of the military might discourage deeper questions. "You served?" Sam asked, trying to keep his voice even. 12 years, the man answered with a smirk that never reached his eyes. In the tense silence that followed, Sam picked up subtle signs. The man's stiff shoulders, the unbalanced stance, dog tags that were too clean to be authentic. "No," Sam finally said, "I don't think you did." That was enough to snap the man's patience. He lunged, a crude swing that Sam barely sidestepped in time. They crashed into the nightstand, sending a cheap lamp shattering across the floor. Nia scrambled off the bed, trying to stay out of the way. Sam grabbed the man's wrist, twisting to disarm him of the belt he was whipping forward like a makeshift weapon. The father broke loose, and for a moment the two circled each other, both breathing hard. Sam's training took over. Years in the service had honed his reflexes, but he hadn't been in a brawl like this since leaving. The motel room was cramped, forcing them into close-quarters combat. The father managed to land a couple of solid hits, but Sam used his weight and skill to drive the man against the wall, pinning one of his arms behind him. A knee to the abdomen made the man gasp, sagging down onto the stained carpet. Suddenly, the door to the room burst open, and Arya entered with 2 uniformed officers at her side. They had responded faster than expected. Sam relinquished control, letting them do their job. The father was quickly cuffed. Arya examined him with a cold gaze, refusing even to dignify his pained groans. Nia stood in the corner, tears streaking her cheeks, a look of stunned disbelief on her face. Sam wanted to tell her she was safe, but the words wouldn't come. He just nodded to her, and she blinked, almost as if trying to wake from a nightmare. In the aftermath, everything felt surreal. The flashing lights from the cruiser cast jagged shadows through the open door. Arya's phone buzzed, and Sam heard her quietly requesting paramedics to check on Nia. The father spat out excuses and threats, but nobody listened. His lies had run their course. The dark truth behind that polite smile was finally laid bare. For a few minutes no one spoke. The only sounds were Nia's shaky breaths and the far-off rumble of a passing truck on the highway. Sam slumped against the wall, feeling the throb of bruises forming where the man had struck him. Arya knelt next to Nia, gently removing the zip ties, checking her arms for injuries. One of the officers hovered by the door, hand on his holster in case the father tried anything else. Nia looked at Sam with silent, pleading eyes. She pressed her lips together as if searching for the right words. Eventually she managed to say, "He told me I wasn't wanted anywhere. That nobody would ever look for me." Sam swallowed hard, memories of his own difficult childhood swirling inside his mind. He thought of all the times he had believed there was no way out, no one to turn to. Before he could answer, Arya wrapped a gentle arm around Nia's shoulders, guiding her toward the hallway. There was a paramedic waiting there. They would check her vitals, take her to the hospital if needed. Sam followed behind them, ignoring the protest of sore muscles. Outside, the night air felt jarringly cool against his sweat-soaked skin. The father was hustled into a squad car, his once confident sneer replaced with panicked indignation. Red and blue lights strobed across the parking lot, illuminating the chipped paint of the motel in harsh flashes. Arya turned to Sam. "We'll process him for kidnapping, abuse, whatever else we can add. If that's the same child from the missing person report, this is bigger than just local." Sam nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He glanced at Nia, who was being gently guided into the back of an ambulance, her battered hoodie clutched in one hand. She glanced over her shoulder at him. Her eyes were still wide, but for the first time, they held a flicker of relief, like maybe she was finally waking from a very bad dream. The officer who had come with Arya walked up to Sam, a solemn understanding in his gaze. "We'll make sure she's placed somewhere safe," he said. Sam watched the ambulance door close, sirens starting up. He released a shaky breath. Everything seemed to slow down, as if time needed a moment to catch up with what had just happened. He closed his eyes and remembered the moments that led to this. Her rummaging in his trash, the bruise on her arm, the soaking hoodie on his doorstep. It felt like every sign had been screaming at him to take action sooner, yet he had hesitated, uncertain. Now, at least, he had done something that mattered. He had stopped a man who was using the foster system as a facade for something cruel and dangerous. A wave of dizziness hit him as the adrenaline subsided, replaced by pain in his ribs. One of the paramedics outside the ambulance came over, insisting on checking Sam's injuries, but he brushed them off momentarily, stepping closer to the vehicle where Nia sat. She was wrapped in a thicker, cleaner blanket now. Her eyes flicked to him, lingering on the fading bruises on his knuckles. He managed a faint smile, trying to convey that everything would be all right now. She lowered her head, but a corner of her mouth trembled as if she almost wanted to return the gesture. Arya put her hand on Sam's shoulder, guiding him away so the paramedics could do their job. "You did good," she told him quietly. "Really good." They stood there a moment, saying nothing more. The father was locked in the squad car, the swirling lights painting stripes of red and blue across his furious face. Sam could practically taste the bitterness in the air, but amid that, there was a sense of justice, of having finally done the right thing for someone who needed help. Sam turned his gaze back to the ambulance. He saw Nia's small hand gripping her hoodie in her lap. The battered garment no longer fit her, but she clung to it as if it was a shield. Behind the ambulance, more headlights appeared. Another police car arrived, presumably to help process the scene. Arya reached for her phone. "We'll have a detective from the station question him. We'll see how many lies unravel. From what you said, he's been forging his military background, probably to avoid suspicion. I'll make sure that detail doesn't get overlooked." Sam closed his eyes again, his heart pounding. The father might have fooled child services, but he couldn't fool a thorough investigation. Not this time. A paramedic approached, insisting Sam at least let them check the cut on his brow. He nodded absently. As they dabbed disinfectant on his skin, he thought about the path that led him here, about the soft knock on his door and the trembling voice that had asked for warmth. He wondered how many times she'd had to ask strangers for help, how many times she'd been ignored. A long moment passed before Arya came back over to him, her mouth set in a firm line. "He's out of the picture," she said, jerking her thumb toward the squad car. "They're taking him in for further questioning. He won't be getting anywhere near her again." Sam let the paramedic finish, then he stood straighter. He noticed that in the swirl of police chatter, one officer was carefully removing the belt from the motel room floor, bagging it as evidence. Another was photographing the battered furniture, the scattered remains of the lamp. It was a crime scene now. The place where Nia had been held and threatened would not hide behind a whitewashed lie any longer. He looked to the ambulance, watching the door close. Nia's eyes caught his for just an instant through the small window. And then she was gone, sirens wailing as they took her to be treated for whatever injuries she had. Sam felt drained, but beneath the exhaustion simmered a fierce relief. He had no illusions that life would magically become simple for her. But he knew that at least from this point on she wouldn't be alone, lost in the cracks of a system designed to help but so often manipulated by the worst kinds of people. He let out a shaky breath, then turned to Arya, who was organizing notes and speaking quietly with her uniformed colleague. The father's claims of a military background had been a sham, a cover for who knew how many twisted acts. Sam wanted to believe this was the end of the line for that man's cruelty. His mind flashed back to the moment the father lunged, belt in hand. The memory made Sam's stomach churn. In the swirl of headlights and commotion, Sam nodded at Arya, who gave him a small, sad smile in return. He could see her steeling herself for the paperwork, the statements, the bureaucracy that followed. but there was a determined spark in her eyes. She wouldn't let this case drift into obscurity. Sam took a few steps away, feeling the cool night air against his bruised skin. He thought of that wolf patch on the hoodie, the small figure walking with her head down, day after day. He wondered how often she had gone hungry, how many times she had been hurt in that tidy house no one suspected. He glanced once more at the flashing lights and felt a wave of complicated relief. In the distance, the paramedic van was already pulling out of the lot, carrying a child who finally had a chance at a safer future. Sam saw the father's face pressed to the window of the squad car, his eyes full of hatred. Sam met that glare head-on. There was no fear left in him now, just a steely resolve. He may have been reluctant to get involved at first, but he had done what needed doing. And if he had to fight all over again for that kid, he would. The father looked away as if refusing to acknowledge him. The car's engine rumbled. In seconds it was gone, tail lights receding into the dark, taking the abuser to face what he deserved. Sam stood alone in the parking lot for a moment. Overhead, a flickering street lamp cast harsh shadows across the cracked asphalt. He thought of the day he first saw her rummaging through his trash, the trembling question she asked about borrowing something warm, and how badly the system had failed her, just like it had so often failed him and Arya in their youth. He heard Arya approach, her footsteps crunching on the gravel. He turned to see her slip her phone into her pocket. She rested a hand on his shoulder. Neither of them spoke. The words seemed unnecessary. They had done it, rescued a child from a nightmare that had paraded as a normal household. Somewhere deep inside, Sam felt a weight lift. The pieces of the dark puzzle had come together. The hoodie, the bruises, the misleading father, the missed chance by child services. Now, in the swirling police lights in this bleak parking lot, the truth was laid bare. He shut his eyes one final time, letting the sound of the distant sirens echo in his ears. And then he opened them, stepping away from the glare of the overhead lamp. The night was quiet, all the tension drained from the air. For a moment, it felt like he could breathe again. He whispered a single word before turning to follow Arya back to the car. Finally, if you stand for exposing the truth in the darkest of circumstances, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching.